All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sue Williams, the CEO of Children's Trust of South Carolina. And first, I want to thank Governor McMaster for this event today and for his continued support for preventing child abuse and neglect. Governor, you have consistently made the cause of prevention a part of your public service for all these years, and for that we thank you. Today, we recognize April as Child Abuse Prevention Month, the time when we focus on the many things that we as a community can do to help children and their families. Raising awareness is a critical first step in preventing child abuse and neglect, and this month we use the opportunity to start a conversation about the supports we know that parents need year-round, and how we can build communities to support the families that live there, so children can readily access what they need to grow healthy and strong. We know that children are safe when families are strong, and families are strong when they live in communities that wrap love and support around them. Because when we all work together to build a South Carolina where every child thrives, South Carolina is stronger today and generations into the future. As many of you know, Children's Trust was established in 1984 by the South Carolina State Legislature. Our purpose was, and remains today, to fund innovative community programs that work to prevent the abuse and neglect by strengthening and supporting families all across South Carolina. Over the past 39 years, we've learned a lot about prevention and what it takes to build protective factors within families and communities that keep children safe before the crisis of abuse and neglect ever happens. However, beyond the science, the research, and the know-how, the stories of a family on the brink of crisis moves us to action and keeps us focused on the work. For example, we had a mom a number of years ago in Charleston County, and for those of you that have a child close to you in your life, you might think that this is a really difficult thing. It was for this mom. She was a single mom of 4 kids, and her life was falling apart. And she thought that the only thing she could do, the only thing she knew how to do, was to relinquish her children to the custody of the state because she was not a good mother. And fortunately, when she got to the DSS office in Charleston, there was a caseworker there who said to her, "I think I know what can help. There's a program down the street that Children's Trust is funding, and I think that this might be good for you and your family." We didn't know any of this until graduation, when at the graduation they asked how the program helped them, and she said, "I know that we aren't perfect, but our family loves one another and we're gonna be okay." That simple time together, learning how to be a strong family, made all the difference for them, and that's what Children's Trust does. We can help a family before the incidence of abuse or neglect happens, and we all win. And it is the best investment in our future. Most importantly, the children win. They avoid the toxic trauma of adverse childhood experiences, including violence, neglect, and family separation. Governor McMaster, State Child Advocate Whittle, and Director Leach, thank you all for your tireless work on behalf of the children and families in South Carolina. Thank you for being a champion for our children, and Children's Trust is proud to stand with you. Next, I welcome Amanda Whittle, the South Carolina State Child Advocate and Director of the South Carolina Department of Children's Advocacy. We appreciate her partnership and voice for the children and families in South Carolina. Thank you for your work in improving the outcomes for children who are served by the South Carolina state agencies. Amanda.
Good morning. My name's Amanda Whittle. I'm the State Child Advocate and Director of the Department of Children's Advocacy. Child Abuse Prevention Month provides an invaluable opportunity to focus and raise awareness about protective factors to prevent child abuse. How can we prevent a child from being abused? Studies show that there are risk factors which may increase the likelihood of experiencing or perpetrating child abuse and neglect. For example, children younger than the age of 4 or children who have disabilities are at greater risk for being abused or neglected. Why? These are our most vulnerable children because they may not be able to avoid abuse or neglect or tell someone about their situation. In addition to these types of risk factors, there are individual, family, and community risk factors which make it more likely that someone will abuse or neglect a child. Now, that doesn't mean that these risk factors say that everybody who has that risk factor will abuse or neglect a child, but these characteristics increase the likelihood, like driving. If you're speeding, you are more likely to be in an accident than if you are driving the speed limit. Doesn't mean that everybody who speeds is in an accident, but if you are speeding, you are more likely to be in an accident. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you'll have a wreck, but it increases the chances. And protective factors are things that are likely to reduce the risk of harm, like wearing your seatbelt. I was grateful for the press conference at the governor's mansion, talking about the Department of Public Safety shared statistics that there were 1,090 motor vehicle accidents, deaths in South Carolina, and out of those, 386 folks weren't wearing seatbelts. And so the campaign, click it, don't risk it. This is like that. Child abuse prevention is like that. What can we do to reduce the risk and to increase our protective factors? Knowing how prevalent child abuse and neglect are and learning protective factors are why we're here. As individuals, as family members, and as members of the community, we can be a part of a strong social network that supports stable and positive relationships for children and people around them. I graduated from law school on a Monday, and I had my first child on a Wednesday. I traded in my law books to learn how to take care of a child. I was nervous. I was scared. I had just given birth to who I thought was the most amazing creature that had ever been put on the planet, my little son. And I wanted to take care of him, and I wanted to do a good job. So this was one of my protective factors. I bought the American Association of Pediatrics book, the American Academy of Pediatrics book, and read it. And as you can see, it is well worn. And it helped me with things like, I think it's interesting too that all of my bookmarks are of cakes, but that's another story. But I read this part here and actually turned down the pages and put stars around it. This word colic. Why is my baby crying? I'm holding him and he won't sleep. Why is my baby teething? He's teething and he cries all the time. What can I do to help that? My baby's, come to find out that the fact that he's fussing at me and being belligerent is part of a normal developmental milestone, and this too shall pass. So I say this to say that it has a wonderful section too in the back about child abuse and neglect, because sometimes the people that we think we can trust, we can't. And we have to remain vigilant with our children, and we have to listen to them and be people that our children can come to when they're in trouble. So Children's Trust said it best on their social media post earlier this month: one caring adult can make all the difference in a child's life. May we challenge ourselves to be the kind of people that children can count on to make a difference. It's my pleasure to stand here today with folks who are making a difference and to be in front of you. You're listening and you're tuning in because you too want to make a difference in the lives of children. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Director Mike Leach, who leads the South Carolina Department of Children's, no he does not. He leads the Department of Social Services. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Director Whittle. Good morning, Governor and everybody. It's good to know Director Whittle learned the knowledge of a protective factor, which is the knowledge of developmental milestones, which is something we all need to try to work on as we have children and are parenting our children. I'm Mike Leach, DSS State Director. I'm here today to recognize the importance of South Carolina families and communities working together to prevent child abuse and neglect. During the calendar year 2022, DSS received more than 66,000 reports of neglect and abuse of children in South Carolina. And about 54% of those were screened in or accepted for investigation, meaning we actually went out to determine if there was abuse and neglect in that case and provide the wraparound supports as needed. Without the eyes and ears of the public and mandated reporters defined in state law, children cannot thrive in our state if they are in situations that do not allow them the basic expectations of safety. But we all must do more than just call and report families. There are ways the community and reporters can help children and families. Remember, we are all members of a community. Whether that's our neighborhood, our church, our child's school, or just out and about in our hometown. Understanding that child abuse and neglect can occur in any zip code and within any family can help us realize that keeping kids safe and supporting families is up to all of us. Kids need strong families to grow and thrive safely, and families need supportive communities to lean on when tough times come. And we've seen a lot of tough times lately through the pandemic and post-pandemic. Parents, grandparents, other caregivers, educators, grocery store clerks, pediatricians, social workers, coaches, librarians, faith leaders, police officers, and others can play a role in preventing abuse or neglect from ever happening to begin with. It is important for us adults to understand the role we play in a child's life because of positive impact we can have on them. It is important for adults to engage with children, listen to them, ask them questions, build rapport with them, and believe in them. Provide hope. Give hope. Parenting is important to recognize that it's okay to feel overwhelmed and exhausted at times. I'm a parent. I'm overwhelmed and exhausted most times with parenting. It's normal. It's a part of life and should not be a source of shame or guilt. And it is possible, though, to find a balance and happiness. Our children are also suffering and even overwhelmed. We have to jump back in the game and give everything not to let them spiral any further. We have to be better parents. We have to focus on their needs. Being a parent is one of the most rewarding and challenging experiences one can have. South Carolina has the opportunity to lead the way on transforming our child welfare system in our state as we develop a robust service array to provide needed supports to children and families, and even move to a proactive engagement approach before abuse or neglect ever occurs in the first place, instead of a punitive and reactive response when neglect or abuse happens. Let's go upstream. Let's help families where they're at so they don't have to get further into a system. To achieve this, first and foremost, we must destigmatize seeking and providing help to families and expand resources. We all need help from time to time. And access to those resources to the families across state who need them the most. Things like childcare, housing assistance, and training highly skilled workers utilizing the state's powerhouse technical college system to create economic prosperity, to move our state into a space of true prevention and focus on holistic well-being for families. Those are protective factors, those type of things. We at DSS were especially drawn to this opportunity because we in social services know that more than ever, our South Carolina families can't be invisible to us. Families in poverty and families who are marginalized are especially vulnerable and are at much higher risk to be left behind. And our communities cannot leave anybody behind. As of today, South Carolina currently has 3,796 children and youth in foster care, which is the lowest number in over 5 years. Thanks to a continued effort by those of us here today and the quality of practice by our casework professionals and our case managers who are working with families every day to build strengths, meet their needs, and try to connect the families to supports like Children's Trust and the folks they work with to wrap around them and give them hope. I want to highlight the collaboration by the groups here today, like the Children's Trust, the Department of Children's Advocacy, along with our elected officials, including you, Governor McMaster, and the support and resources from our state's General Assembly. Abuse and neglect does not have a one-size-fits-all cure. It takes a lot of different things, a lot of different people. Communities have to believe they're a part of this. But if a member of the public does suspect abuse or neglect of a child, you can call our DSS reporting line at 1-888-CARE-FOR-US, and that's 1-888-227-3487. And now I will turn it over to my boss and the leader of our great state of South Carolina, Governor McMaster.
Thank you. And y'all may not realize this is your 4th anniversary on the job.
Correct, yes.
Doing an excellent job. This is a great day. And I have a proclamation in a moment. But a few years ago, when I was lieutenant governor and presiding over the Senate, there was a senator named Glenn Reese from Spartanburg. And one time, you know how they always introduce people up in the balcony and have different groups? Well, there were a group of very young school children coming in that were in the balcony that they must have just been in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade or something like that. And Glenn had been a school teacher years before. And as he was looking up at them and applauding them for having achieved the recognition that they had to be there, he said that he was a school teacher for many years, and if he'd thought about it a little more and realized all those children will grow up to be adults, he probably would have worked a little harder trying to teach them things. We often look at, the point is, of course he was joking, but the point is that all these children will grow up. And sometimes it's difficult to grow up under the best circumstances. See that book?
Oh gosh, you're going to see the pages I have turned down.
Yeah. Now, can you imagine? I mean, it's hard enough when you have everything you need, stable family and all of that. I have 2 brand new grandchildren, and both of those parents are all over them. And I mean, it's a lot of work raising children. And to look at this and imagine that people in the best circumstances have to learn and relearn more and more about what's in this book and others, that's hard enough. But imagine if you're a child who does not know what the world has to offer or how it's supposed to be, and they are trying to grow up in what is not an ideal situation. And there are a lot of them. It is tough. They don't know any better. You watch the little ducklings follow the mama duck, they just do exactly what she does. You watch the birds, you watch nature, they just do exactly what they see. That's the way they think it's supposed to be. So unfortunately, we have a lot of children for various reasons that are growing up that are being taught or not taught the right things. And so that's when the government and private citizens have an opportunity and an obligation to do something. And that's why we're here today, to celebrate the work that these institutions, that these people have done, and encourage them and all of us to do more. But before I do the proclamation, one more thing. There are a lot of ways for a family to be introduced to tragedy. There are a lot of ways for a family, by whatever your definition is, to have hard times and to stumble and often to fall. But very often we have families or people trying to be families, trying to raise children that all of a sudden come into contact with a force that they did not anticipate and is nowhere in this book. And that is someone coming in and introducing violence, drugs, and that kind of behavior into what is trying to be a home. And often those activities are accompanied by illegal gun possession. What is an illegal gun? If it's got a serial number that's been rubbed off, it's an illegal gun. If you have it, you're committing a crime. If you have a gun that's been stolen, and they're stolen, you ask the sheriff, ask the chief, or any in this state, they are stolen out of glove compartments, out of homes, all the time. That is an illegal gun. If you have it, you're in violation. If you're in certain locations, in churches or in someone's home that wants no guns, or courthouse, that is an illegal gun. You are committing a crime. And if you have been convicted of a violent crime in South Carolina and you have a gun in your hand, in your possession, you are committing yet another crime. Another point is we know for a fact that there are a lot of criminals among us. We don't want to make it, we don't need to invent new types of crimes. What we need to do are prevent those and punish those that we can't prevent. And we have a revolving door in South Carolina. You have seen it, where a person will commit a crime, often a crime involving an illegal gun, and they walk right out on low bond. You have them involving drugs, you have them involving various assaults and batteries and murders and all sorts of crimes from A to Z, and yet they walk out and do it again. We know that 80% of the known criminals commit about 20% of the known criminals commit about 80% of the crimes. And I will challenge each of you to read the newspapers the next few days and see if you don't find another one who is out on bond having committed even murder and does it again, is charged again with a violent crime, usually with an illegal gun. So the legislature's upstairs now. We have to see to it that these kinds of forces, which we can prevent, are not another stroke of violence or deprivation that comes into these lives of these children and these families trying to grow. So I would ask everyone who is concerned to contact their legislators, contact the people they know, and tell the legislature that it is very important that they keep the violent criminals in jail. We must have enhanced penalties. If it's your second time that you have committed a crime with an illegal gun, then you ought to get an enhanced penalty. If you do it again, it ought to be even more enhanced. If you're committing a crime with an illegal gun, the penalty ought to be higher. We ought to have bond procedures that keep the violent criminals in jail so they cannot destroy the families and ruin the lives of these children. If daddy gets shot, if mama gets shot, if the house is robbed, if the car is stolen, think of all the ramifications of that. So the legislature has been considering these type measures for some years. They have taken some steps recently, but they take more. We've got to close that revolving door, and we have to see that there are enhanced penalties for these crimes involving illegal guns, and that violent criminals are not let out on bond to do it again and again. And as we promote those measures, keep in mind the face of the children, because ultimately they are the ones that suffer from any kind of crime that is committed in our state. So I will now, if you hold that, I'll get the one I can read better because it's in bigger print. You ready? Okay, stand there. Come on up, Sue. South Carolina, let's see. State of South Carolina Governor's Proclamation. Whereas South Carolina's 1.1 million children residing in the diverse communities across our state are the most valuable resource and will shape the future of our great state. And whereas childhood trauma, including neglect and abuse, is a serious problem affecting every segment of our community, and finding solutions requires input and action from everyone. And whereas childhood trauma can have long-term psychological, emotional, and physical effects that have lasting consequences for victims of neglect and abuse. And whereas protective factors are conditions that reduce or eliminate risk and promote the emotional, social, and developmental well-being of children. And whereas effective child neglect and abuse prevention activities succeed because of the partnership created between child welfare professionals, education, health, community, and faith-based organizations, businesses, law enforcement agencies, and families. And whereas communities must make every effort to promote programs and activities that build strong children and families. And whereas it is necessary to work together as a community in partnership to build awareness about child neglect and abuse and contribute to promoting the social and emotional well-being of children and families in a safe, stable, and nurturing environment. And whereas prevention remains the best defense for our children and families. And whereas in the fiscal year 2021-2022, there were 9,031 substantiated child protective services investigations with 15,978 children in South Carolina. Now, therefore, I, Henry McMaster, Governor of the great state of South Carolina, do hereby proclaim April 2023 as Child Abuse Prevention Month throughout the state, and encourage all South Carolinians to dedicate themselves to protecting the quality of life for the families and children so that we end child abuse and neglect. And it is signed by me, your proud, happy governor, Henry McMaster, on behalf of 5.2 million proud, happy South Carolinians. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? Does anybody have something else to say that we left out? Sue? Okay. Anyone? All right, well, y'all, thank you very much. Come back to see us.